of a truly remarkable Delaware family. The Delaware Marker Historical Program began 90 years ago in 1931, and since then, well over 700 historical markers have been positioned throughout the state of Delaware to commemorate houses of worship, historic buildings, historic locations, and notable Delawareans like we're doing today. An important point to keep in mind with these markers that they're not selected by the staff of the archives. They're selected by constituents. They're selected by individuals in the community and groups. They begin working with our local legislators to have historical markers of this type placed to give the recognition to a selected point in the history of the first state. So thank you, Laura, for bringing the Abraham Shadd family story to us at the archives. I also would like to thank Senator Elizabeth Lockman for her wholehearted support and financial sponsorship of the marker, and a special thank you to the City of Wilmington for their enthusiasm and assistance, absolutely, and to Deborah Martin, who was instrumental in helping us place the marker in a real seat of prominence. And now with that, I get to turn this over to our 74th governor of the first state, the Honorable John Carney.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. This is really exciting, and I understand a long time coming as I've been sitting there getting ready and going over my list of elected officials. More have arrived. So I better not get them wrong. Senator Sokola, somebody will clean it up for me, but I do want to add my thanks to the City of Wilmington, the Delaware Public Archives, the General Assembly, Delaware Historical Society. I know we're represented here today. All Delawareans who love Delaware history and are committed to telling the full history of our state, including Black history, which we celebrate today and kick off. My job this afternoon is to read the proclamation designating February Black History Month in our state. I'm also delighted to be here with my partner, Lieutenant Governor Hall Long, who's going to speak after me as well. We do have the sponsors of this historical marker, Senator Tizzy Lockman. And we didn't think she might be here, but she insisted that this is her district, this is her marker, and she's a Wilmingtonian. She is Representative Stephanie T. Bolden, the emphasis on the T.
Behind there.
Fellow church member of mine. And Representative Larry Lambert, who represents my old neighborhood up in Claymont. Yesterday, our president from Delaware, President Joe Biden, in his Black History Month proclamation, reminded us that National Black History Month serves as both a celebration and a powerful reminder that Black history is American history.
Yes.
Black culture is American culture. And Black stories are essential to the ongoing story of America. Our faults, our struggles, our progress, our aspirations, the full story. Shining a light on Black history today is as important, I would add maybe more important, an understanding of ourselves and growing stronger as a nation as it has ever been before. And that's why it's essential that we take time to celebrate the immeasurable contributions of Black Americans, honor the legacies and achievements of past generations, reckon with centuries of injustice, and confront those injustices that fester today. One of the great privileges of my many years in public service and as elected official is to learn more about Delaware history, and more recently, Delaware Black history. And that's why I was so proud to sign Representative Dorsey Walker's legislation ensuring a robust, accurate Black history curriculum is taught in Delaware public schools.
Good job, Governor.
I got your name right? It's also why I'm so excited with the discovery of a burial ground for enslaved Africans at the John Dickinson plantation in Kent County in our state, so that we're able to tell the full story of America and colonial America. Just this past weekend, I was with the governors across the country, and we had a visit to Mount Vernon, George Washington's plantation. What struck me is that we did not hear a lot about the enslaved Africans who were residents in that plantation. A little bit, but certainly not as much as I would have liked to see. And I'm really looking forward to all of us coming together, faith leaders, elected officials, members of the community, family members, to sort out how do we present the burial ground there at the John Dickinson Mansion. My hats go out to the Division of Historical Affairs for their work so far on that and bringing people together. The most important thing about today's event is we have the family of Abraham Shadd here with us today, and we're going to hear later from Jan Michael Shadd Green, who's going to speak. He just shared with me that he commanded a reserve unit in our military here in the state of Delaware just a few years ago. He is the great, great, great grandson of Abraham Shadd. What a great treasure to have him with us today. And so with that, it's my privilege as your governor to read our proclamation, which reads, whereas Black History Month presents an important opportunity to honor the African American members of our community, to reflect on the progress our country has made, and acknowledge, importantly, the work we have yet to do. And whereas we encourage Delawareans to learn the stories of those who fought against prejudice and discrimination, advance the cause of civil rights, and strengthen families and communities in our state and nation. And whereas we have a responsibility to teach all Delawareans about this important history and to promote equality and acceptance in our schools, workplaces, and communities. And whereas African American men and women deserve sincere recognition for their significant contributions to Delaware's economic, cultural, spiritual, and political development. And whereas we are proud, so proud, to join together as Delawareans to recognize Black History Month in honor of the many contributions African Americans have made to the great state of Delaware and to our nation. Now, therefore, we, John Carney Governor, Bethany Hall Law, Lieutenant Governor, do hereby declare February 2022 Black History Month in the state of Delaware, and urge all citizens to observe the month of February with appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities that emphasize the history and contributions of African American Delawareans. Be it said and be it known to all. And next up, our Lieutenant Governor, Bethany Hall Long.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. Put that right here. You know what? Got
I'll
it.
take it with me.
Take it with you. Wow.
Thank you, Governor. I appreciate your reading our proclamation. I think for all of us who are gathered here who are privileged to serve at the electorate, Black history is American history. I want to repeat that. Black history is American history. And Governor, we've been joined by a few more electeds who found their way. I know you got through a little of the list, but we have the leader of our Black Caucus, which is Kendra Johnson. I think we missed you before. We see Representative Frankie Cook has joined us. We have our Councilwoman Oliver who snuck in, and our Senate Pro Tem Dave Sokola. And if I missed anyone else, they've been sneaking in because they recognize the critical importance as our governor has read this proclamation today. It's not enough to be 1 month. This is our history. This is our daily lives. During the past 2 years, as our governor has championed with others across this country during COVID and led us forward, we all know one thing, and I can say this as a nurse: we all bleed red. We are a common denominator, and it is my honor to be here today as we unveil an incredible marker that many of you, Chris Knight and others in our Secretary of State's office, along with our incredible Corey Marshall Steele, who's running around, with the archivist who's making sure we follow the agenda. But to each of you who are leaders, this is a remarkable day. It's 2 years in the making, and that we are going to be honoring someone who left a national imprint. And we are delighted to have family members here, all the way from Virginia and other communities across our nation. I will say that as we unveil this marker, let us visit here often, but not leave it as words on a plaque, that we embrace and we embolden the values of our American community and for what our brothers and sisters stand for as a united community, a united Delaware, which is so much stronger when we come together. And the one thing, for those of you who love a little history, the marker will tell you a couple items. But for those of us who are a month ahead of Women's History Month, this is Black History Month. And it is incredibly important as we stand here and we honor the Abrams Shadd family, we also recognize the lineage that's here today, who've come forward, but also some of the incredible women that fought during this time as well. And we'll get into that, I know, next month. And I know we have our state auditor and others who've joined us here, women and who've been involved in our community. I have to say, it is so important that we embrace the work not only of Abrams Shadd, but his remarkable daughter. First lawyer, first journalist to publish, and I want you to think about that in America. So when we unveil this today, it's not only Delaware history, it's American history, and American history is Black history. Thank you. I now have the honor of bringing forward, unless my MC is doing this, I get the sense, do I have an MC back there, sir?
I'm sorry.
Are you being the MC?
I can do that.
Okay, and if not, we'll turn that over. I know we're going to be hearing from Lori, but I think you might have a little introduction. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And thank you.
Thank you.
Let's give it up to our public archivist here, who's done an incredible job. Thank you.
Thank you. We're honored to be here today because of the steadfast dedication of Laura Bilton Engelhardt, who brought the story of the Abrams Shadd family to the archives 2 years ago when we started the process. Okay. So with that, I'd like to introduce our constituent, Laura Bilton Engelhardt.
Thank you so much. Would the Shadd family members that are here today, would you just give a little wave so we know who you are? I first read about Ann Shadd Cary in a July 4th article in the News Journal about freedom. It was written by Mike Billington. And in his article, Billington compared Shadd Cary's lifelong quest for personal freedom with the quest for freedom that our forefathers fought. Billington also pointed out that no one in our state seemed to know about Ann Shadd, a Delaware native. I began reading about her and became determined to attain for Ann Shadd Cary the official recognition she deserves. I successfully nominated Shadd Cary to the Hall of Fame for Delaware Women in 1997. I then nominated her to the National Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca Falls, New York in 1998, and proudly watched as she was inducted along with Madeleine Albright, Oprah Winfrey, Eunice Shriver Kennedy, and others. By the way, Shadd Cary is only one of 3 Delaware women in the National Women's Hall of Fame. And I want to pause here for a moment and thank my sister from another mister, Catherine Short, who helped me in obtaining names of the Shadd descendants. Catherine had taken a tour group to Canada, to the terminus of the Underground Railroad in Canada, and she knew all the Shadds, and she introduced me to them, and she was immensely helpful in my research. I also submitted an application to the Delaware State Archives in 2002 requesting a historic marker. Yes, folks, that's 20 years. I'm not throwing the State Archives under the bus. There were reasons for the delays, and it was put on hold again and again, but we are here today. It is fitting that the Shadd family state historical marker is placed adjacent to the Peter Spencer Plaza. Abraham and his wife Harriet attended Spencer's church. Abraham even served on a committee with Spencer to consider the colonization of free blacks to the coast of Africa, which they rejected. Abraham had a successful business. He owned several properties. He was a community leader in Wilmington, and he worked diligently with Thomas Garrett, guiding freedom seekers through the Delaware stretch of the Underground Railroad. This ground we're standing on right now is close to Abraham's parents' home, which was on 9th and French Streets. And it was close to Abraham's shoe shop, which was on Market Street. Abraham and Mary Ann and the rest of the Shadd family would have walked right in this area where we are walking, where we are standing today. As you probably observed, well, we didn't ask the Shadd family descendants where they're from, but let me tell you, none of them is from Delaware. And I defy anyone here to tell me that they have met a Shadd person in the state of Delaware. No. It's because Abraham was one of 12 children, and he fathered 13 children. So there were a lot of Shadds in Wilmington. But they left one by one to seek better opportunities and better treatment elsewhere. Abraham left Delaware in 1833 and settled with his family in Westchester, Pennsylvania. There he again made a name for himself, managing a successful business, buying property, continuing his work on the Underground Railroad, and now representing Pennsylvania at conventions of free people of color, and served as chairman, just as he had done for the state of Delaware. In the years preceding the Civil War, increasing restrictions on free people of color made it difficult for them to achieve the quality of life they wanted and for which they were abundantly qualified. And they lived in fear of being kidnapped and sent back to the Deep South into slavery, since they had no master or laws to protect them. Even so, though in his heart Abraham opposed leaving the United States, in the end, most of the family moved to Canada West, separated from the United States only by a sliver of the Detroit River. In Raleigh Township, Abraham became the first Afro-Canadian elected to public office.
Wow.
In 1994, the road that traverses the heart of North Buxton was renamed A.D. Shadd Road in his honor. In February 2009, Canada Post honored Abraham with a commemorative postage stamp. Abraham is buried in Maple Leaf Cemetery in Chatham, Ontario, and on his tombstone is engraved the line, "Born in Wilmington, Delaware, 1801. He never forgot his roots. As for Mary Ann, she prospered as a result of her parents' decision to leave Wilmington when she was 10 years old. In Westchester, she received an exemplary education. She went on to teach, to open an integrated school, to start a newspaper, become a lawyer, and to engage in writing and lecturing to black and white audiences alike on a variety of topics: abolition, financial responsibility, self-respect and motivation, the value of education, women's rights, women's suffrage, financial law, and more. In Canada and Detroit, there are schools named after Mary Ann Shadd Cary. In Delaware, there are no schools named after Mary Ann Shadd Cary. In Canada, there are Canadian historic markers dedicated to Mary Ann and to the newspaper she published, the Provincial Freeman. And a bust of her stands in Freedom Square in Buxton. Her final home in Washington, D.C. was added to the National Historic Registry in 1976, but her home here in Wilmington was demolished many years ago. In the African American Museum of History and Culture in Washington, D.C., there is a display recognizing Mary Ann's skill in oration. But in Delaware, until recently, there have been no visible tributes to Mary Ann or her family. Today's historical marker dedication, along with the recent renaming of the Wilmington Post Office to the Mary Ann Shadd Cary Post Office, right a centuries-old wrong and finally places the Shadd family and their accomplishments on public view. At Mary Ann's funeral in D.C. in 1893, Bishop Daniel Payne stated that her energy and perseverance, as well as her ability to suffer in the causes she espoused, entitled her to rank among the reformers of the time. She left to others to carry forward the torch she had ignited. I hope, as we approach and prepare to celebrate the 200th year of Mary Ann's birth in 2023, you will join me in carrying forward the torch for Mary Ann and follow the example set by her and her father Abraham, and do all we can to make positive differences in our world just as they did. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Now I have the extreme honor to introduce the great-great-great-grandson of Abraham Shadd, Jan Michael Shadd Green.
It is indeed an honor and pleasure to be here today on behalf of the Shadd family. And as I was driving up from Silver Springs, Maryland, Governor, I was talking with family members in Canada, and they are just so excited and wish they could be here, but they all want to thank you. Like I say, we're just so very happy to see this recognition of Abraham Doris Shadd and family, because this is his hometown. We'd like to thank Governor Carney, Lieutenant Governor Hall Long, Senator Lockman, for approving this initiative and championing it through completion. Senator Lockman, thank you so much for helping to fund this project. Thanks to the Delaware Public Archives and the Delaware Historical Society, and particularly to Mr. Taylor Reynolds for all the hard work in keeping us informed throughout the process. And lastly, thanks to Laura Bilton Englehart, who, for working with the Delaware Public Archives and being a friend of the family for the last 25 years. And in fact, Laura, she's so much part of the family now that your speech, I don't even need to stand. I don't even need to talk, because you said such wonderful words on there. In fact, I'm going to cut some things out because I don't want to repeat them. But helping us to keep this memory alive here in Wilmington. Abraham's parents, Jeremiah and Sally Shadd, they owned a shop somewhere here, and that's what I want to find that out. But they owned a shop, and Jeremiah was a butcher, and Sally made confectionery treats. But her claim to fame was this really good ice cream recipe that she had here. In fact, it was so famous, they say, that Dolly Madison, leaving from Philadelphia, going to Washington City, which they referred to it back then, stopped in Wilmington, got the recipe, took it to the White House, and served this recipe of ice cream. So if you look up, just Google Aunt Sally Shadd, and you'll see this whole thing about Abraham's mother's ice cream recipe served in the White House. And because, like I said, I don't want to repeat everything that on Abraham Shadd, because Laura did such a wonderful job. But bottom line is, Abraham was he was a shoemaker by day and an abolitionist by night. You know, and as Laura mentioned, you know, and the family basically lived here for about 60 years, from about the 1870s or 1770s to 1833. And it was then when, because in part, at least by the Fugitive Slave Act, they moved to Westchester because, you know, like in 12 Years a Slave, it didn't matter whether you're free or slave, you could be taken. And so that was one of the reasons why they had left. But Abraham, he still left his house here in Wilmington, and he used that for freedom seekers moving up north. And as Laura also mentioned, in 2000, when he went to Canada and was the first black elected official in Canada, and then in 2009, Canada put him on a post stamp, and they did it all across Canada, and I was able to go to Toronto and help do the unveiling of that stamp in 2009. And I say all that to give you an idea of how A.D. Shadd, he led by example, and how he inspired greatness in his children. Now, for example, we all know about the eldest child, Mary Ann, and that's an amazing woman in terms of being a teacher, editor, attorney, activist in the suffrage movement. I'm sorry, I got my pages mixed up.
Sorry. We're not going anywhere.
Okay, wait, don't go nowhere.
We're here.
His other children went on to do great things as well. His son Isaac, who worked in Canada with his sister Mary Ann on the newspaper. After the Civil War, he went to Mississippi with his wife, who was a teacher, and he was a bookmaker. But during Reconstruction, he was elected to the State House of Representatives and held the position of Speaker of the House in Mississippi from 1874 to 1876. His daughter, Emmeline, became a teacher at Howard University. Abraham's son, Abraham W., who served during the Civil War and fought with the famed 54th Massachusetts Regiment, you know, of the movie Glory fame. And then he went on to attend Howard's Law School and graduated with a law degree a few years before Mary Ann. And then Abraham's daughter Eunice, who attended Howard's medical school, became a doctor, and I believe the second or the third female doctor that graduated from Howard's medical school. Now, all Shadd family members are taught at an early age about their heritage, whether we liked it or not. We were going to learn it. So, when we had reunions, we had games, and we were taught this. So it was always fun. But we try to do our best to live up to that legacy as well. For example, the bust of Rosa Parks in the Oval Office that President Biden has in his Oval Office, and the statue of Sojourner Truth out in the Capitol Rotunda, those are the works of Artist Lane, the 91-year-old sculptor and descendant of A.D. Shadd.
Wow.
Warren Shadd, owner of the only black piano manufacturer in the U.S., and one of his pianos is in the Vatican, and his sister is here today with us. Bishop Angela Shadd Purnell. She is a minister in the United Methodist Church, and also a bishop in the Jabala New Life Ministries in the D.C. region. She holds two hats. She has, and Jabala means rejoice in Swahili. And Angela is here with her granddaughter, Zion Michelle. And my cousin, Dr. Bruce Purnell, a psychologist, founder and executive director of the Love More movement, following the footsteps of our ancestors in a journey of healing and liberation, also a descendant of A.D. Shadd. And Lee Jones, retired Naval JAG officer, Colonel. Lee, where are you? Yep, also a descendant. And myself, Jan Michael Grain, I'm a retired Army officer, Colonel in the Chemical Corps. So, just two last things. My wife and daughter wanted to be here, but my wife we were sledding and had an accident, so she's recovering at home. She's okay, but she couldn't make it. But my daughter, 3 years old, Carol Alexander Shadd Grain, she's got 3 godfathers. 2 of them are here today. I hope they made it. They were looking for a parking spot, and I hope they. Oh no. Anyway, Phil Hunter and Bob Jones. Bob Jones, who's a retired Army colonel, and retired attorney Phil Hunter. Now, we've been discussing activists. Mary Ann was activist, her father was activist, and that like to get into what we call good trouble. Well, Phil Hunter is one of those that used to get into good trouble, and he grew up in Selma, Alabama, and marched with John Lewis and Martin Luther King all 3 times over Pettus Bridge in 1965, and I hope they could make it. And lastly, but not least, I'd like to recognize Bob Seeley. Bob is the descendant of one of the most famous abolitionists, Thomas Garrett from Wilmington, Wilmington's own. Garrett shuttled through over 2,700 freedom seekers through his home in Wilmington, Freedom. The Garrett family and the Shadd family not only knew one another, but they worked together as station masters in the Underground Railroad. Officials knew that Garrett was an abolitionist, but they never caught him until 1848. He was jailed and tried in federal court by none other than Chief Justice Taney of Dred Scott fame. Garrett was fined so much that he had to sell his business and his home. But by the time he got out of jail and came back home to Wilmington, the people of Wilmington raised enough money for him to buy his home and his business back. And Thomas Garrett went back to being an abolitionist. So here to Thomas Garrett, you know. But now he still needs to be pardoned for his crimes of helping souls to freedom. And Governor, unfortunately, you can't do it because it's a federal, and so. But we hope that now we have a Delawarean in the White House, that Thomas Garrett can now receive his pardon. So, again, on behalf of the Shadd family, I just want to thank you, sir. Thank you so much. The family's just elated, and about 80% of the Shadds are up in Ontario, and a good amount of them are in Michigan, and there's a few of us that are down here in the DC area and elsewhere, but all of us are just so grateful, and just thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Before I introduce our next speaker, I think that we may have missed one of our esteemed guests. I want to make sure that we all recognize and know that our wonderful Representative Dorsey Walker has joined us. So thank you for coming with us. Next up is someone who was invaluable to the archives and the partnership in placing today's marker. I'd like to introduce from the City of Wilmington, Deborah Martin. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, okay. Today is a day for living history.
Yes.
We sorely need it, do we not?
Yes.
We're here not only to honor the freedom work of Abraham Shadd and Reverend Peter Spencer engaging together, likely at the Union Church of Africans right here in this space, but to honor the relationships of the present, the people who are keeping stories alive, sharing truths with curious and hungry minds. I'm especially honored today to be in the presence of the Shadd, Purnell, and Garrett family descendants who are engaging in this work. And by the way, who are fresh from having lunch together at the riverfront. So try to wrap your mind around that. Over 200 years of history to catch up on over lunch. I'd like to thank the governor and the General Assembly for continuing to support the Archives Marker program. Has anyone here, and Laura, you can't raise your hand, ever tried to write one?
It's hard. No, we're leaving that to you guys.
If you ever have, you will finally appreciate why your 7th grade teacher spent so much time trying to teach you how to summarize.
A lot, yeah.
650 characters and spaces. What torture. And what an exercise in making every single word count. What that means, though, is that every marker can only be a teaser, an opportunity to go and look for more layers of history under our feet. Every marker has pages and volumes of backstory. I hope that someday archives can host not only the marker text, but some of that vibrant and necessary context. We've heard today about Abraham, Harriet, and Mary Ann Shadd from the people who know their story best. I want to sneak in a mention of another Shadd before I get the hook. Elizabeth Shadd Williams. There's not a lot written about her or that you can Google, but she was the sister of Abraham. She was a great citizen of Wilmington and a sister in the cause with abolitionist Thomas Garrett. Mrs. Williams and her husband ran a grocery store at the foot of French Street, and in it they boldly carried the newspaper edited by her famous niece, Mary Ann. The prominent abolitionist H. Ford Douglass visited Delaware in 1857 and claimed in the Provincial Freedman newspaper that there were, quote, only 2 avowed abolitionists in the place, Thomas Garrett and Aunt Betsy Williams, unquote. When Thomas Garrett died, Elizabeth Williams wrote the eloquent and emotional letter of condolence from the Shadd family to Garrett's son, Henry. Like I said, there's not much that you can find about Mrs. Williams, but thanks to the late Peter Dalio, who published his research in the Quaker Hill Quill, and to Garrett descendant Bob Seeley, who never throws anything away, we have it to refer to today. And if you would like to read a little bit more, see Bob. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deborah. Now I get to introduce a friend and a colleague, David Young from the Delaware Historical Society.
Thank you so much. This event bears witness to how African Americans were continually making their way into citizenship, even when it was denied them. And on behalf of the Delaware Historical Society and our Mitchell Center for African American Heritage, I thank you for allowing me to share brief comments on this occasion with so many esteemed speakers and participants. My job is made a lot easier because our public officials are history nerds, and I really appreciate the presence today of all our state officials, especially the governor and the senators and the representatives. We've been planning this for years, and we were actually going to host it in May of 2020, and we thought, no way, not if we're going to have descendants and public officials. This deserves a big to-do. So we appreciate your patience. As Wallace Stegner said, history is a Doppler effect. It takes time and effort and patience. And we've been planning it so it's a relief to be here today, because this new marker represents an evolution in the memory infrastructure. Markers, monuments, and museums make up the memory infrastructure of any community, And for a long time, the memory infrastructure of this community did not reflect its people, the largely African-American community in Wilmington. And when people do not see themselves in the markers, the monuments, and the museums, a kind of cynicism results. An effective public history provides a heritage therapy by including an evolving memory infrastructure based on how we know what we know, learning more about the events of the past, and how it changes and grows with new knowledge and new perspectives. And this project represents effective public history at its best. Citizen historians working with descendants and scholars in diligent research for the public good. Institutions like mine collaborating with the state archives and the marker program to get it right, and a publicly shared experience of the lasting result, in addition to the memory infrastructure that reflects the residents and the community. I've been asked to say just a few words about the unique state of the community in which Abraham Shadd raised his family. When he started to become more prominent in the abolitionist movement in the 1830s, and he used both his homes in Westchester and Wilmington to provide lodging for freedom seekers fleeing southern states and southern counties. He was a prominent voice in the anti-colonialization movement, and Shadd was one of 5 black men at the founding of the Board of Managers of the American Anti-Slavery Society in 1833, as well as a prominent member of the Colored Conventions movement, serving as a leading delegate in 1841. Now, during that time, Wilmington's population hovered between 6,600 and 8,400 people. And during the early 1800s, opposition to slavery led slave owners to increase the numbers of those who were given their freedom. And as a result of that trend, half of the black population, or 13% of the total state population of 1800, consisted of free blacks. By 1810, Delaware supported a larger proportion of free people in its African-American population, 76%, than New York or New Jersey. And by the 1830s, population shifts led to the largest African-American population settling in New Castle County. So in the 1840s and 50s, Wilmington, bolstered by migration from the southern counties, sustained a population that numbered nearly 2,000 inhabitants. Increasingly, more blacks became free, not so much from having been freed as from being born free, of free parents. Sussex alone retained a comparatively large population of slaves. The numbers in Kent and New Castle County decreased. And by 1840, Wilmington held only 15 enslaved Africans, and by 1850, none. By the eve of the Civil War, 3 blacks represented 92% of the total African-American population and 18% of the total state population. Only 1,800 slaves remained in the state in 1860, while free blacks numbered over 20,000. So in Wilmington, in 1800, there were 444 black citizens, or black African Americans, and in 1840, 1,600. So during the 1830s, Abraham Shadd is part of a growing influx of free blacks. And African American population in Wilmington continued to grow steadily to over 1,600, and by 1850, it numbered the largest urbanized African American community in the state. And because of the greater availability of jobs in the city when compared to the countryside, women usually outnumbered men by a few hundred as well. And even though in the 2 decades prior to the Civil War, one cannot identify a specific location of Wilmington inhabited exclusively by African Americans, they solidified their presence in areas like this, known as Bull Hole, Whiskey Bridge, Love Lane, and Hedge Hill. Wilmington's free blacks proved to be socially active. Sources, for example, number 3 temperance unions, a Masonic lodge, Odd Fellows, and a secret society called the Queer Fellows. An undetermined number comprised these lodges in which African Americans participated and grew their community together. Delaware's legislature, meanwhile, enacted increasingly harsh legislation to restrict their political and economic progress. These laws typified those of slave states in the Upper South, where free outnumbered non-free blacks. And in those states, fears developed among white majority that a growing presence of free blacks would cause problems. William Yates, an agent of the Anti-Slavery Society and a minister, visited Delaware in the 1830s, and he described this situation as the mark of the beast, the mockery of freedom that burdened Delaware's African Americans. They are, quote, they are either truly neither slaves nor free, being subjected to the disabilities and disadvantages of both conditions and enjoying few of the benefits of either. Of course, even free African Americans risked the threat of being grabbed by slave catchers or arrested because they were free and thought to be slaves. One of the most notorious of the slave catchers was Paddy Cannon, who you know lived 4 miles west of Seaford on the Sussex border with Maryland. And the presence of such gangs meant that free African Americans lived in a constant state of fear that they and their members of their families would be sold into slavery. Taking free blacks had fewer consequences than seizing those who were slaves. And in the decades before the Civil War, Delaware legislators passed a range of acts designed to prevent African Americans from achieving equality. For example, free blacks, although they paid taxes, could neither vote nor testify in a courtroom against whites. There were few schools available for their children. In 1821, the state passed a law that denied state aid for the education of free blacks. In 1826, a law was passed requiring free African Americans to carry freedom papers at all times, signed by an authorized white person. And a few years later, laws were passed denying them the right to bear arms. As of 1839, only free African Americans could be sold if convicted of a crime. And in 1845, they were denied or banned from buying or selling alcohol. Some of these draconian measures were not enforced, but William Yates found that the laws passed after Nate Turner's rebellion in 1831 seem rather to have been to degrade, to crush, and to render blacks powerless. People like the Shadds, however, had other ideas. Free blacks played an important role in the development of Delaware. Many who had been slaves enjoyed their status of freemen, but found that harsh laws restricted their advancement. Nonetheless, they persisted. Historical evidence reveals not only how loudly their voices and actions opposed such obstacles, but the many accomplishments achieved by them. Notable among these were Wilmington's free African American community, and they had built not only the largest African American community in the state, but an active leadership role in the fight against equality. Taking advantage of the town's diversified economy and the opportunities to organize political and social groups to address issues of slavery, the lack of educational and economic opportunities, and equal treatment before the law. Sound familiar?
Yes.
Although some, like Abraham Shadd, chose to leave the state to seek success elsewhere, many remained to build families, faith communities, churches, and participate in social activities which fostered community growth. The Wilmington directories indicate that the area of Frenchtown between 8th and 12th is where the Shadds eventually clustered. And it's no wonder that later, and in the 20th century, a vibrant black culture evolved in this very area, evidenced by the businesses, a movie house, a school, dentists, barbers, salons, eateries, jazz music at places like Spots Cafe, Burton's, Gaines Barbershops, Estella's, Howard High School, you name it. From renting to owning, working, living among similar people of similar backgrounds, building a vibrant community, a mixture of enslaved and free blacks, industrious, whether in craftwork, mills, or founding faith communities, newspapers, and support associations. Folks participated through work, faith, sharing information, and advocating for one's people, the pillars of civic society. Abraham Shadd and his family exemplified leadership to make possible a way into citizenship, even though it was denied them. Thank you for letting me be here today. Let's keep going as we give life to history today, this month, and every month of the year. Let's keep going. Thank you.
Man, oh man.
Thank you, David. I'm happy now to introduce our sponsoring senator, Senator Lockman.
All right.
Thank you, Corey. And I told Dr. Young I wasn't excited about following that, but he did not surprise me with how wonderful that was. But in any case, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here on this beautiful day as we mark the beginning of Black History Month with a long overdue tribute to, as we have heard, a lot about a true Delaware hero, two of them really. It was an honor to support the realization of this marker after so much time and effort. And, you know, Black history, I think, is as much personal as it is political. We've heard a lot of political things, and I really wanted to take this opportunity to share a bit about why sponsoring this marker meant so much to me on a personal level, and to urge everyone to embrace the opportunity to explore your personal connections to our Black history, and with so many wonderful folks we can learn about this month and well beyond. Like a lot of us, I've been a fan of Ann Shadd. We recently unveiled a new marker for her not far from here. But like so many other Delawareans, only recently really learned about her father, Abraham, thanks to the diligent advocacy of Laura Engelhardt. And I do love a good father-daughter story, and this one has a number of themes that really resonate with me. In part, I learned of the fact that Abraham was a Black American of multiracial heritage, which I am. My daughter is. This is my youngest child, who I brought with me today. Beyond the question of complexion, though, is a deeper story here of faith, of commitment, and of legacy. I'm looking for Bishop Gibson from IMAC, who's here with us today. When I say faith, I wanted to remark that he is with us. A shoemaker by trade, Abraham rose up beyond his circumstance and put his own life at risk to speak his truth. We've learned a lot about that. Rejected the separatist movement that sought to relocate free Blacks to Africa, recognizing just 50 years after this nation's founding that people who look like us, all the many different ways that we as Black Americans look, are America. And he would, sure. He would then put his own safety and his own life at risk to right the original sin of our nation by providing slaves who managed to escape their subjugation with shelter, sustenance, a path to freedom, while also working openly to tear down that institution of slavery. In Abraham, this is where I get personal, I see a bit of my own father, Norman Lockman, who wrote about race and the complicated consequences of our nation's steadfast refusal to grapple with it more than 100 years later. And in Ann Shadd, I see her inheritance of Abraham's dedication to truth and justice, as she became the first Black woman to publish a newspaper, much like my father was one of the first Black men to work for the Wilmington News Journal many years later. And like me, she was dedicated to public education, eventually leaving the first state when educating African American children was outlawed here in 1833. My father's family similarly departed Delaware for southeastern Pennsylvania. We did come back. I urge you guys to consider it. In fact, the family fled the United States entirely, as we now know, when Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, which made it illegal to help fleeing slaves. Abraham, however, refused to settle for his own success and give up the fight for equality, becoming, we can't mention it too much, the first Black elected official in Canadian history. And I can relate to that instinct to want to serve in elected capacity, to do better for everyone. So the story of the Shadd family has parallels to the story of my own family, and those parallels, that inspiration, would be all but forgotten without our collective commitment to remembering our history, our Black history. And that history so often begins with a parent sharing their stories, their values, their morals with a child or 13 children. And it continues in moments like this when that personal history becomes our collective history. So I hope this can serve as a monument to that for all of our family histories, the way they continue to intertwine, as the Shadds and the Garretts did, on our path to being the best we all can be, an ongoing collective project, to say the least. So I want to just thank again Governor Carney, Laura Engelhardt, all the guests and dignitaries here today, my pro tem Senator David Sokola, Representative Bolden, who also represents this area and was a founder of our Delaware Legislative Black Caucus, members of which are here today. Representative Kendra Johnson is our chair. We've got Representative Dorsey Walker, Representative Lambert, Representative Cook. Our auditor is here today. Councilwoman Xanthia Oliver is with us. And massive thanks to Delaware State Archives, Corey Marshall Steele and his amazing team for making this all possible. We can give him a big round of applause. And most of all, of course, to Jamichael and the family for keeping your faith and your history alive for us, for sharing it with us to honor, to continue to learn, reflect, and enjoy. Thank you all very much, and I think we have some unveiling to do.
No, it's the tradition at the marker dedications and when we unveil them that everyone after the marker is unveiled to read along. So to make it easy on everybody, so we're not squinting, on the back of your program.
Thank you, Corey.
Anytime. So with that, Governor and Jan Michael, would you like to do the honors?
Yep. And we will just...
And let's see if we can move this out of the way.
Yep.
I think I gotta push it back. Thank you, Governor. An all-purpose governor.
He does. He's full-service governor.
He is. Full service.
Absolutely. Okay.
Oh, everyone.
Over.
All right.
Okay, ready?
We're in Delaware. Our senior senator is not here, so I'm going to give the countdown.
Okay.
That's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Whoa!
There you go. Okay, shall we read it?
Let's read
Go
it.
ahead.
Abraham Doris Shadd
Was the
grandson of Ann
Was the grandson of Ann and Elizabeth Shadd, a Hessian soldier and free black woman who settled in Delaware in the 1770s. Abraham was a shoemaker and a well-known abolitionist movement to Wilmington who aided freedom seekers. He also served as president of the National Convention for the Improvement of Free People of Color in the United States in 1833. Abraham and his wife, Harriet Purnell Shadd, had 13 children. The eldest, Ann Shadd Cary, 1823 to 1893, became a teacher, journalist, lawyer, and activist in the abolition and women's suffrage movements. She was also the first black woman newspaper editor in North America.
Okay, and if we could have the principal stay near the marker for photos.